You're watching The Future of GP Training with RACGP, produced by GP Supervisors Australia and presented by Georgina Vanderwater and Associate Professor James Brown and Glenn Wallace. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this recording was produced and pay our respects to their elders past, present, future and their families.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that through the presentation we will answer many of the questions or give some insight into the directions of the RACGP and the transition of the AGPT program to college-led training. The return of the professions to a college-led model was first announced by the Federal Minister for Health, Greg Hunt, in 2017. And the return of training to the profession met with overwhelming support from our members at the 2021 AGM late last year. The recognition that the return of general practice training to the college brings the RACGP in line with all other specialist medical colleges, giving it determination over the education and training of the future workforce. We want to build on the work of the regional training organisations in the delivery of the program. We recognise the importance of relationships on the ground and the critical role of supervisors and their practices, and see the ability to continue these across the country as an important way of enabling the RACGP to achieve our purpose. Our purpose is to ensure a strong profession that keeps Australia healthy, and college-led training will certainly work towards enabling that. So there's 6 elements that we are addressing currently in the college-led training model, and our college-led model is profession-led and community-based. The first of those elements is the delivery of the AGPT program. So it'll be brought in line with other medical specialties, and it'll provide the opportunity for a whole of career relationship and support for our GPs from training and throughout their practicing life. The second point is national consistency. So the government is seeking national consistency from the training program into the future, and we see that there's some areas within the program there's opportunities for that to occur. And that's educational resources and exam preparation, greater flexibility across the country for registrars, supervisor support and professional development, research opportunities, program evaluation, consistency across the promotion of general practice, and a focus on reducing administrative burdens for practices where the opportunities present. We can become more efficient. There will be national management of some areas of the program, removing any unnecessary duplication, and a shared services approach for many of the services such as finance, marketing, HR and IT. The cost savings through those shared services model and approach will be put back into the design and delivery of the education program and into the training that is delivered on the ground. The fourth element is fit for future training. So we want to, as I said before, build on the current success of the RTO training. We want a fit for purpose training approach that really meets the needs and expectations for the next generation of GPs. Quality training supporting the equitable distribution of registrars, prioritising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and the needs of rural and remote Australia all form what we view as the need for a fit for future training. The delivery of the program, we need to ensure that there is a smooth transition. We want to make sure that our registrars, our supervisors and participants can expect a very similar approach in 2023 to the current arrangements. We are working with all the RTOs currently to understand their business and their models for support around the team members that they have in place. And we'll be creating approximately 800 new roles within the RACGP. Now, we know that the success of training into the future relies on the knowledge, expertise, capability and capacity that currently exists in the program. We are aiming to attract into the college as many of the same faces as you already know today. The sixth element there is the RACGP and the GP journey, and we want it to be a one-stop shop throughout general practitioners' lives where they have the ability through their careers to inform college decisions, to inform training opportunities, and to be supported by the RACGP. Structures of our model is there's 3 components to this. There is a national component, and that's the nationally consistent framework, things like the curriculum and the shared services model I mentioned. The regionally coordinated area is our state level coordination. And then the most critical part for the success of the future of general practice training is that it will be delivered locally by people who know local communities and are closely connected to GP supervisors and practices. So the key features of our model, as I said, locally delivered, contextually driven education. We want the strength of the relationships with registrars needs to be core to what we all achieve. Flexibility and mobility for training of registrars, the embedded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural and health training components, target areas of workforce need. We need to understand and continue to support the initiatives that are currently in place and identify the opportunities for more initiatives that support and meet the workforce needs in line with training opportunities as well. There'll be progressive assessment throughout the training program. As you know, we have a rural generalist program, and the RACGP continues to support rural training as well as rural generalism. A strengthened training in academic general practice across Australia, and a collaborative approach with ACRM to reduce burden on the practices. We want to make sure that where there are ACRM and the RACGP can optimise the use of support or resources and reduce the impact on practices, that we're working in a collaborative way that enables that to occur. So the model is a positive step forward in reform. It supports doctors in training and our communities, and it is also will address workforce needs. Where we land on February 1, 2023 is not where we finish. It's absolutely is the start, and there will be iterative improvements. You will see that continue throughout the delivery of the profession-led training. So the grant guideline opportunities, where we're at right now, in 2021, the Department of Health produced and released the grant guidelines. In January 2022, earlier this year, the RACGP prepared a response for the funding grant. Our response was submitted, and in February, March, that's been evaluated by the Department of Health. We are now currently in the negotiation period with the department, and we envisage June being the earliest start date for grant activities. The negotiations are progressing positively, and we meet with the department on a weekly basis. And as you can imagine, there have been delays. We're ready to go, and we're continuing with those negotiations, and we're close. And of course, the Minister is very keen to have this closed and moving forward as well for the move to profession-led training. So some takeaways for our supervisors. We know that there is a lot of anxiety and concerns around transition, and we are committed to ensuring that transition and the change that occurs as a result of that will be as seamless as possible. I'd love to sit here tonight and guarantee you that you would see no bumps in the road, but the reality is there will be some. But we want to identify those. We want to smooth them out, as many of them as we can, before we get to February next year. And then we will be listening to what you need and where we can improve along the way as well. We are working with the RTOs so that we understand now what we can do to minimise disruption. We recognise the important role of medical educators in supporting our registrars with their training plans and the requirements for fellowship. And we're committed to ensuring that medical educators from within the RTOs across Australia are encouraged to remain in general practice training and to transition into the program with the college. We hope that many of the MEs and training coordinating team members do see a place for themselves within the RACGP, and therefore will have the opportunity to draw on their experience and contribution that's been invaluable, and obviously reinforced through the training administrative support functions that you all interact with regularly. They've got a vital role to play in transition, but more so into the future of general practice. We're working closely to make sure that this is done smoothly in a manner that supports success. So things like accreditation, all existing accreditations will be upheld and recognised. New accreditations will be managed in line with our accreditation framework that is currently in the final approval processes. And this is drawn on the existing frameworks and experience, and is designed to support high quality experiences within GP training. Administration, we are most conscious of the impact of unnecessary administrative requirements on supervisors, practices and their teams. We want to ensure that the requirements contribute in a meaningful way to the training outcomes and that automation is adapted wherever it's possible and appropriate to streamline processes for all concerned. With the payments that practices will receive, you may have already been familiar with some of the communiques and information from the Department of Health that I know GPSA has shared as well. There is a new nationally consistent payment framework that the Department of Health has designed and are implementing from 2023. And we will provide the information to the Department of Services Australia, and they will be responsible for delivering the payments in accordance with the nationally consistent payment framework. So we're looking for opportunities to better support GP networks and professional development as well, and some of these will be done in collaboration with ACRM for practices and supervisors that are accredited to both colleges. So takeaways for training practices. The model is locally focused but will ensure a national consistency. We'll support practices to continue their vital role. And we have the opportunity to learn from the diverse experience across RTOs and draw on the expertise within the GP training to understand what works well across the country. And we want to implement a program that supports quality and innovation in GP training. So as I mentioned before, we'll be supporting practices. The accreditation will be upheld. Quality underpins the accreditation requirements. We're responsible for any training site accreditation from February 2023 that is due for reaccreditation. And there'll be opportunity for supervisors and practices to participate in the training program that will be measured in line with those accreditation requirements, the ability to deliver quality education and training experiences, and also based on a balance of registrar numbers and training opportunities. So term placement for 2023, the current RTOs will be coordinating the placements for 2023 in line with their normal processes and policies. The RACGP will uphold those term placements that are agreed and coordinated by the RTOs. And some RTOs will be coordinating those on their 12-month basis as they have been, and others will continue with the 6-month placements. So for the first term in 2021 and for some for term 2 as well, those placements will be coordinated as you would anticipate this year, and we will uphold the match of those placements between the practices and the registrars. The policy requirements, so as far as policies go, the policies of the RACGP remain in place and have not changed for 2023. Our policies are regularly reviewed and amended to meet training outcomes, but things like diversity of training experience and the exam eligibility are still policies that remain within GP training. So better transferability, we want to understand the areas of flexibility that registrars are seeking in their training, and we believe that the college-led training is well positioned to support increased flexibility in training while not foregoing policy and standard requirements. So we want to make sure registrars are best positioned to care for our communities into the future, that they're provided with the experience to build the skills that they need and the confidence, but also in a way that meets their personal training plans as well. Some of the questions that have come up have been very much around a lack of urban registrars or the need for additional rural registrar and so forth. We are committed, as I said, to ensuring that quality in training does occur. But there is also a need to balance the workforce requirements, but more importantly, the need to support our communities across Australia. Part of being able to achieve balance requires an understanding of where the opportunities are and also attracting more doctors into general practice training. We want general practice to be a career of first choice, and we're developing strategies to support community need, registrar training and workforce distribution. But the Department of Health, you may be familiar that there is the grant out at the moment for the workforce planning and prioritisation agencies that will run separately to the 2 colleges and are funded by the Department of Health, but will inform priority areas for general practice training opportunities where they are needed. Registrar attraction is a really critical part to making sure that we continue to be able to support the community needs in Australia, and we're dedicated to improving the conditions for GPs as a college and providing quality learning experience opportunities as well. This is the first one of many opportunities that we will create for engaging with supervisors and to provide information as we go. And once the grant opportunity is finalised, there will be more activity, of course, moving towards transition. And we want to make sure that supervisors are informed with information that is relevant and timely to them, and for their practices to be able to prepare for transition, and similarly for our registrars.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So we might start at the very pointy end, which is contemporary for this very moment, and that is around funding. And one of the questions that has been not only articulated very well in the registrations, but has been out there in the ether anyway, is if the Commonwealth grant funds fall short of what is required to deliver what is currently being delivered by the RTOs very well, where does the cloth get cut? Is it going to affect supervisors? Is it going to affect the enablement of registrars in hard-to-fill placement locations? And what is the college's current thinking around that?
Our position is that it's in nobody's interest for that to occur. It's not in the department's interest. It's certainly not in the community's interest. We see that where there is efficiencies is through things like our shared services model. The payment arrangements for supervisors is already articulated when it comes to the practice subsidies and teaching allowances that the department has agreed. The opportunities for us where we see the savings is not in that frontline delivery of GP training. However, we know that the resources and support mechanisms that enable that frontline delivery are also important. So we're being very clear in our negotiations with the department around that. However, our compromise is not something that we see or will accept being in that frontline delivery for GP training.
Yeah, right. And so one of the other things that has been front and centre, because there's plenty of staff and plenty of practices that remember the last time that we had a reshuffle of GP training and the disappearance of some well-loved RTOs, was that known and loved factor of GP training practices and their needs and the needs of local communities and distribution, things like that. So what work has currently been done within the college to understand the special bespoke arrangements that are in place currently with the RTOs, and to what degree will those enablement activities be honoured and continue into the future?
Yeah, so we're in close discussions with the RTOs to understand the things that are successful within their training footprints currently. We also want to understand the things that might have been something they would love to have done, but haven't yet had the ability to implement. So what are some of the opportunities that they see within their footprints as well? But the Department of Health, ACRM and the RACGP are working with the RTOs to really identify and articulate what it is that's making a difference in those hard-to-fill regions, in the areas of attraction of registrars to more remote areas, and how we can uphold and continue those initiatives and enhance them into the future. So we don't want that knowledge to be lost. We don't want to blindly make decisions that adversely impact those unique, successful arrangements that are in place. So at this stage, we recognise that there are different mechanisms to support community and training outcomes that we want to understand, and we want to be able to ensure we have front and centre in the conversations with the Department of Health so that they understand as well. And also, as I mentioned before, we want to retain the key team members, and 800 roles will be a large set of opportunities for people within the regional training organisations to continue within GP training across the country. And we recognise that that is where that relationship is so vital and so important and in place at the moment, that they do have a unique understanding of training practices, the supervisors, and that the supervisors have somebody in most situations where they can trust, where they're able to go to and feel a sense of support and reliable information being available to them.
Yeah, great. So I'm gathering then that the non-negotiable of supporting those places and the enablement of registrars to go to those hard-to-fill places has been strongly put by the college within those negotiations that are not yet finalised. So looking forward to hearing of the success of those. The training program detail, obviously the devil is always in the detail. And so there's some interest here, James, around how exactly the role of the GP supervisor might change with the transition to the college. What is your take on the role of the GP supervisor changing within the context of the transition?
As Georgina has indicated, we see that training as it's delivered currently by the RTOs at the moment is excellent training, and we also understand that the fundamental model of GP training in Australia is work-based training and practices, and that is essentially dependent on the quality of supervision and the hosting and the practices. So the quality that happens now needs to be preserved into the future. And as Georgina indicated, we are in significant conversations with the RTOs with a view to enable a transition of the current programs into college-led training. So we're not looking at a new program divorced of the previous programs. We're looking at a transition or a movement of the current programs into the new programs. And we have, we think, benefited from the experiences of the transition that occurred 2015 and 16 and seen where there was a decimation of training on the ground when there was issues with a transition of a previous RTP to an RTO and when there wasn't. And very much it's about enabling a co-design of how training will look in a particular footprint. So we are putting considerable effort into engaging with the RTOs to enable a co-design of training within each of the RTO footprints. And that really is to ensure, as Georgina has said, that there's a preservation of the legacy of the current training organisations and also a transition of the staff so that the experience of registrars and supervisors and practices isn't compromised, and that we can use this transition to not only preserve the legacy that we have built up in Australia, but also to address some of the things that haven't worked well into the future. We see that this change is actually an opportunity to take the training program to a new level of improvement.
Yeah, fantastic. There has been a number of changes that have occurred over the last number of years since we reduced to 9 RTOs anyway. The RTOs, one of the things that they have tended to do well is continuous improvement. There is a number of questions around supervisor CPD. So over the course of 20 years, we've come to understand the importance of face-to-face networking opportunities where supervisors can share experiences. It's the type of skill that you gain over a lifetime of the particular role that is not found or picked up in a textbook readily, and you do continue to learn those skills. So is face-to-face going to be and remain a feature of CPD training for GP supervisors? And will they be funded for same? I know obviously we've got the nationally consistent payments for supervising and practice teaching and for the practice subsidies that have currently been in place, but where are we at with the CPD?
So we've put a substantial amount of work into planning for supervisor PD and support under college-led training. Gerard Ingham and his team have led a substantial project over the last year. And just to flag several things, we do see that supervisor PD is essential for supervisors and the support that supervisors are provided. And we've certainly put a generous allocation in our application for the grant above what is in the sector at the moment for supervisor PD. We see that the supervisor PD can benefit from a national approach, so that a nationally designed and resourced program has been developed for supervisor PD, and that's going to be a mix of online remote delivery and face-to-face delivery depending on the context and on the needs of the supervisors. The CPD program that we will be delivering will have a strong emphasis on face-to-face peer networking. So we intend in the localities to facilitate groups of GP supervisors to get together on a face-to-face basis to peer network and benchmark the work that they do, and for this to be facilitated by our local medical educators. And finally, we're looking very much at a model of bringing CPD into the practices with the support of medical educators, where practice supervisory teams seek that. We think that practices as educational institutions and should be supported as such, and that taking supervisors out of practices for CPD isn't the only way to be providing PD, that it should be also practice-based.
Fantastic. And that's the next segue into another important cohort that perhaps hasn't had as much attention historically as what it perhaps could, and that's around practice managers. So what is the college's intention at the moment around providing CPD and points for practice managers and the education for practice managers, because they are a key enabler within the context of GP training. We know that we've got a number of RTOs that have practice liaison staff, but we also have practice manager liaison officers as well. So where is the college's thinking there?
So with the model that we published last October, there is a stream of activity that's specifically about supporting practice managers. And that's both at a local and a regional level. So we are intending to have workshops for practice managers and allocated responsibility for supporting practice managers within local teams, and also having a regional practice manager liaison person, much in the same way as there's a regional supervisor liaison officer and a registrar liaison person. So, and we have indeed put a funding stream into that with the government to support that. We do know that practice managers are fundamental to an effective training experience for registrars.
It is a critical part, and the role that the practice managers play absolutely influences greatly the registrar experience and the attraction of registrars to practices as well.
Now, one of the areas that has been highlighted over the last couple of months is with the open of applications to GP training is who or how are practices going to promote themselves as an opportunity placement location. Has there been some thinking, and is there a strategy currently in place for how practices will be promoted, how registrars will be hooked up with potential placement locations? Will it be practice match, which is something that a number of RTOs currently use? Will practices have the opportunity to still interview and select the best candidate and best fit for their practice?
The intention is, we know that the profession and attraction to general practice at the moment is not where we need it to be, and there's a range of factors that influence that. And one thing we don't want to do is put further hurdles and barriers in place of registrars entering into the program. But what we also want to do is make sure that there is absolutely sufficient training capacity and capability within the sector. And we want to ensure that there remains a level of choice between registrar placements and practice choice and supervisors matching each other to their practices. So we're not looking at a model that will absolutely match one-on-one every registrar to a practice. What we're looking at is the opportunity for an open arrangement where registrars and practices can have the opportunity to create a match and to identify the right fit for those practices and the right fit for the trainee. And James, I might get you to talk about the areas that fall out of that principle in relation to those registrars that need additional support and so forth.
The model has a strong emphasis on case management, so it's about a personalised approach to both registrars and practice sites. And this is about identifying and supporting registrars often before they enter training, but certainly from when they get into training, to foster an interest in working in areas of workforce need and to provide a means for them to have a vision for that and then to facilitate that through their training. So we're looking very much at enabling, addressing the rural workforce shortage and areas of workforce shortage need, not by compulsion, but by building and fostering interest and understanding of that sort of work. And then on the other side, building capability for excellence in training experiences within those areas. What we want to do is to foster desire rather than to move to compulsion. And we are intending to have a significant funding bucket that goes towards building training capacity and capability in order to provide excellence in training experience. And that is also excellence in training experience for, I think, Georgina, you're referring to those that have specific needs. So GPT-1 registrars have specific needs, but so do some registrars who are struggling with their progress. So that will be addressed through a case management approach where the registrar-specific needs are addressed on a one-on-one basis, and there's also a capability building on a one-on-one basis for practices to provide the training required for that. And when we talk about the rural pipeline, we understand that what we need is to have a hybrid pipeline in many cases where registrars may well undertake some of their primary training in an urban area where there is quality training that is a suitable preparation for rural practice to then spend some of their latter training in rural and remote environments. So rather than having a siloed rural-urban training, we would like to leverage the training quality that is often in urban places, and also the interest that is in what have been identified as general stream registrars to also work in remote and rural areas.
So you brought up a really good and important topic there, and that is registrars at risk, but not just registrars at risk, IMGs that may require additional support and those sorts of things. The PEP program is a good example of a program that leads to the AGPT program but is currently sitting outside, is not funded in exactly the same way. The college originally put up the PEP program without supervision funding included in that. Is there plans at the present time to bring that into line with the AGPT supervision in practice teaching payments?
There's certainly efforts to do that, and that is the intention. We see that supervision is fundamental to safe practice for both the registrar and the patient, and also for quality educational experience. And often it has become the case that those who are on the PEP pathway are those that are the most vulnerable and need the most support. So our revision of the PEP program, which is happening in parallel to that AGPT program, is to design a program that does indeed have substantial supervisory support as part of it. Of course, the issue here is that the funding will necessarily come from the user, being the registrar, as they don't have access to the AGPT funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a really good comment here from Dennis around supervisors knowing far more than they're engaged to provide input into. What is the college doing in terms of not just garnering what the RTOs are handing over to you, but gaining the opportunity of learning from the supervisors on the ground in terms of what has worked and what hasn't worked and could be done in an alternate fashion?
Well, many of us in the team are supervisors. I'm a supervisor and have been for 30 years and own my own practice, and there are many others in the team are in the same position. We have a team of supervisors who are led by Gerard Ingham in developing our supervisor approach. And we have a project that will run out this year that is specifically for engaging supervisors and understanding their needs and having their input into how this transition will occur and how training will look for supervisors into college-led training. So that's a specific body of work with a project manager and supervisors with medical educator background leading that work, but it will be about engaging supervisors.
One of the things that hasn't always occurred the way that supervisors would like is in terms of their RTOs, their peak bodies advocating on their behalf, articulating the cost impost of teaching, and feeling sure that those that they're providing this service for, not oriented around money, but understanding that they do it often at a cost to themselves, that their best interests are being looked after as well, and those that are in meetings with the department, their interests are being advocated for. What is your take on the nationally consistent payments and the opportunity to increase those with CPI? Obviously, CPI is a relevant topic today with the interest rates going up. The Medicare rates have never kept up with CPI. Has there been any discussions with the department around linking those payments to CPI?
There certainly has been significant discussions with the department about adequate payment for supervisors and supervision in particular. As we know, training and particularly supervisors in Australia are significantly under-supported compared to comparable countries elsewhere. And this is something we repeatedly bring up with the department. And in particular, there is no payment for the act of supervision, which is the most important thing that happens. And we've put to the department on many occasions that they should be introducing a Medicare item number that enables the supervisor to charge for an attendance to a patient that the registrar has seen. There's been interest, but no movement as yet. But I would suggest any of you have any political oomph to you make a noise about it, because personally, I think that that is the way to begin to remunerate the act of supervision as it happens. You know, that's available through our nurse practitioners. They use a supervisor supervising a nurse practitioner can claim an escalation payment. There should be such a payment for supervising registrars and GPs in training.
So one of the other things that supervisors are concerned about, they've put questions around, are those things that are currently dealt with and streamlined through the RTOs, things like accreditation. They'll put them through dual accreditation. in the one go, but also supervisor CPD. We've now got 2 colleges that are delivering their own program. But what is the collaboration between the 2 colleges around making it easy at the coalface to be accredited and to maintain accreditation, and also the streamlining of CPD requirements as well?
Absolutely a big area of focus for us, and we're fortunate to have Gerard Ingham, and Gerard has been leading some of that conversation. But we are working to make sure that where those alignments occur, that we're providing the CPD program and the supervisor is done in collaboration with ACRM so that we recognise those. But Gerard's just joined us, so he's been much more close to that. Thank you, Gerard.
Thank you, Georgina. Just to let you know, I mean, we are having like fortnightly meetings between RACGP and ACRM, and every time there comes to be any little disagreement between the colleges about which way they would like it, I say, I'm an RACGP supervisor and an ACRM supervisor. I don't personally want to have to complete accreditation for both, and I want any professional development activities that I do as an RACGP supervisor or as an ACRM supervisor to be accredited by the other college. There's usually lots of stroking of chin and nodding of heads around the table. So anytime there gets to be an impasse, that reality is discussed. And I'd have to say there is great goodwill between RACGP and ACRM about this. And there is definitely the intent. We're developing a new supervisor program, and the program's been developed with federal funds for new supervisors for both RACGP and ACRM. It'll be an identical program run by each college. Maybe each one will be in GP Learning and one will be in Romeo, but they will be exactly the same. And the same thing, we're looking at whatever activities you do in professional development will be accredited by both. So I'd like to try to put to rest any concerns that the colleges aren't working together in this space. We are working very closely.
That's absolutely heartening to hear. So thank you very much for joining. So talking about shifting gears a little bit now, training practice agreements. It's something that was difficult for some in the last transition. We've got 9 RTOs, we've got 9 different agreements, some as few as 5 pages, some as many as 30 pages. What is that going to look like, Georgina, in terms of what practices will be signing and what will the changes look like?
So we're in the process at the moment of reviewing the agreements that are in place at the moment. As I said before, we don't want to make things more onerous. We want to ensure that the expectations for training delivery are understood and are very clear, but we also don't want to put in front of people 30 pages of legal speak that you need a legal degree to be able to understand. So we want to be practical in the approach to the contracting. The agreements, we will hopefully have the next draft of those in place very shortly with the accreditation work as well. And we will be working with GPSA to ensure that they have the ability to provide further input into that. But the agreements will not be that, as far as the expectations for training, there won't be any huge shift or change from the expectations currently. So they will outline the need for the supervision that needs to be provided, the environment that the registrars need to be training within, and the principles for delivering that in practice education and training. So those components of the agreements, it will refer absolutely to the Nationally Consistent Payment Framework, which will outline the framework that will be applied for supervision and teaching payments. And then the accreditation requirements will also be agreed to in those arrangements as well. So there'll be arrangement for the placement of the registrars that also reflects requirements for accreditation. But we don't want to overcomplicate it. We don't need to overcook it. And we need it to be clear and something that people really understand up front what the expectations are.
Great. And so in terms of, at the moment, you've got the current RTOs that practices are liaising with around the existing set of circumstances, and you've got the RACGP set of circumstances that are about to be brought into play. What's the timing looking like, and how are you going to manage the potential for confusion between existing contracts and new contracts, and which is which, and the risk of people being confused by communicating through multiple people?
As I said, the agreements for the placements are being entered into currently. The accreditations will be upheld, so there won't be any new accreditation requirements. But the process for confirming that and for reassuring the requirements moving forward, we're looking at having something available. We want to have that by the end of the financial year, if not earlier, for practices as well. But The expectations for delivering training currently are done in line with the training standards and in line with the accreditation requirements for the colleges. So those things are not changing, and the accreditation arrangements that are in place are being upheld. And the requirements for the placements, saying that you'll have a GPT-1 registrar training with you for 6 or 12 months, full-time or part-time, will also be upheld. And the rates of those payments are articulated through the nationally consistent framework that the Department of Health has implemented.
Great. So 800 staff, it's quite a few to get under the roof, but not before the RTOs are able to and enabled to continue the service that they're contracted to deliver right through until February of next year. So when are the opportunities for medical educators and administrative positions for those 800 staff going to come into effect, and where are they likely to be advertised? How do they find out about them?
So the one thing we don't want to do is be in any situation where the RTOs are not able to deliver their program through to February 2023. We want to make sure, and so do the RTOs in all of our conversations with them, that what they hand over for the ongoing delivery of training is as robust as it possibly can be. And we all know that that requires the people that are on the ground delivering the training program. We've identified the roles now. We need a funding agreement in place to be able to enter into employment arrangements. But our intention is, in collaboration with the RTOs, to meet with their teams, and we're meeting with some shortly in the coming months, to talk about the arrangements for bringing people into the college, but also the opportunities that will be available. The intention is that people will see those opportunities soon, and they will be able to commit to those beyond February 2023 when college-led training starts with the RACGP. So they'll be able to make early decisions that give them a level of assurance, allow them to complete their employment with the RTOs under the current arrangements, and then have confidence in the fact that there is a position available for them within the RACGP. Now, there will be some roles that might have capacity to be able to transition sooner, and there will undoubtedly be some people who choose not to continue in GP training, and therefore we will need to recruit externally as well. So that is a bit of a staged approach. We're meeting with the RTOs already. We need to finalise negotiations with the Department of Health. We want team members within the RTOs to have the opportunity to understand the opportunities that are ahead and where they might see a fit for themselves. We want to engage them as early this year as possible so that they have confidence moving forward. And then where there are opportunities for that timing to be staged, we'll work with the RTOs and the individuals on that. But we will also naturally need to promote some of those opportunities externally as well.
There was a question in the chat, and that was, should I put off becoming a training practice whilst the dust settles? And the flip side of that is a registrar-related question in terms of, should I just wait till into GP training whilst we work out exactly what it's going to look like in 2023 and beyond? So your advice around that question for both registrars and supervisors on the basis of what is likely to change in terms of training requirements for registrars than what is currently in place?
Current in-place arrangements are something that we know has had a high degree of success and that we want to build on. So registrars will come into the training program, they will be supported. There will be local people on the ground delivering education and support to those registrars. The medical education team are designing the models for that now and the programming for that now. In relation to things like where will I train, where will I be placed, the applicant handbook this year outlines the training regions, and we will continue with those for 2023 based on the placements that are occurring. Any changes to those will be refined down the track, but we're not anticipating that right now. We're not looking at wholesale changes to disrupt what is working well.
Yes, I certainly don't think that now's the time to be delaying or getting out of training. I expect the transition won't be traumatic for either registrars or practices. And I think we're embarking on some good times ahead, and I'd encourage you to be part of that.
Fantastic. And in terms of the workforce, the WPPs that you mentioned earlier, Georgina, do we have any further understanding of exactly how we're going to encourage people into hard-to-fill locations with that particular mechanism? What will be different in terms of workforce distribution? Because obviously at the moment we've got RTOs registrars are contained within those, artificial force fields that make it difficult for registrars to move between RTOs. We're not going to have that necessarily within the college-led training system, or perhaps we do. That's an open question to you. How is the thinking around containing people to particular states, particular regions, and what is your current understanding of the WPP?
So my current understanding of the workforce planning and prioritisation agencies is they will be looking at general practice catchment areas across Australia, and they will be identifying areas of need based on insights from data, but also local knowledge and agencies that are working across Australia. So they will then provide data and information to the Department of Health, who will then use that data and information on workforce needs and community needs to inform the KPIs that they set for the colleges through the AGPT program annually. Now, we will have the responsibility to understand those KPIs and to understand the things that will be levers to support training in the areas of greatest need, but not at the cost of quality educational experiences. And we absolutely recognise there are quality environments across rural, regional, remote and urban areas, and that the contribution to registrar experiences by the entire practice team, whether you're an accredited supervisor, whether you're a GP providing support, is also critical. And those are things that need to be balanced significantly with the town that needs support. We've got things within the program to enable remote supervision as well. We've got current remote supervision models that are being piloted that will help support some of those areas. But what we don't want to do is push people into areas that aren't safe for them to train and won't provide a quality learning experience just because there's a KPI to do it. So we will be balancing all of those things, and we are very clear with the department about our view on the need for high quality supported education experiences within practices for that to occur.
That's certainly been a view that has been shared by the ACRM executive as well. So it's good to have consistency around that. Sorry, James.
Yeah.
We certainly won't be party to forcing registrars to go to places that they desperately don't want to go, and we don't think that a reluctant registrar in a practice is a good outcome. We are very much about attracting registrars to these areas by increasing training capability and ensuring that they have a good training experience, as Georgina has indicated, and by having a training pipeline that actively recruits registrars who are interested in that type of training. And just to answer your earlier question, Glenn, that really means increasing flexibility for movement across our regions and between urban and rural.
Flexibility is music to most supervisors and registrars' ears, so they will be pleased to hear that definitely. One last question. The two greatest challenges to supervisors and quite frankly registrars as well, or the two most complained about items, tends to be information technology, so the systems used to enable the reporting and those sorts of things, and also the communications that are often many and varied coming from the RTO. So what's currently in place? What's the thinking and where are you at with those two items?
So we are looking at the systems and developing the training management system. We want it to be something that enables efficient processes within the practices, so not add further load. We want to make sure that the communication is accessible, timely and relevant. And of course, they're very great principles, but what we want to make sure is that our local teams are informed to support providing the information to the practices and to registrars that is consistent, that meets the registrar and supervisor expectations, and that the people on the ground delivering training have confidence that they know they can reach the college and have the support of the people at a local level to be able to respond to their needs. So communication will come from a number of opportunities and avenues. We'll continue to liaise through GPSA and GPRA as well. We'll have our direct communications and we'll have the local personal communication as well.
Yeah, right. And finally, we have one that I think needs to be absolutely covered off, and that is around oversupplied areas of GP training practices and what the criteria will be in terms of allowing new practices to become a GP training practice, where there is an oversupply of GP training practices, and has there been some thinking around that?
There has been thinking around that, and I'll pass to James in a minute. We don't want to be excluding quality practices from GP training. We certainly want to encourage high quality supervision and experiences. As you know, it's been a theme throughout the conversation tonight. But we also recognise that in some areas across Australia, the numbers of registrars don't support the number of requests for registrars, and that there is a real greater capacity to train than there is the number of registrars training. So our focus needs to be balancing that realistically, creating the opportunities for high quality experiences, but more so increasing interest in general practice as a career of first choice, so that we've got the registrars coming in to be able to fill those practices and meet the expectations within those training locations. James, did you want to add to that?
It's a balance, isn't it? We don't intend to exclude quality training practices and practices that have a strong keenness to be participating in training, but we also need to be sure that a training practice has a reasonable expectation of receiving a registrar, which means not having a large overabundance of training practices compared to registrars. We will be taking both those considerations into mind as we make those determinations, which is really much as many RTOs are operating at the moment. We also need to ensure that there are sufficient numbers of training places in areas of workforce need.
Thank you very much, Georgina and James, for making yourself available, and thanks very much.
GP Supervisors Australia is supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Australian General Practice Training Program.